Okay, so I believe the axis diagnosis or the diagnosis form is the next one that we have in the data dictionary. This one is one of those forms that it'll be really nice to have if the information's available. If not, it's one of those that we can't make you diagnose everybody that comes in the door. So with this, these are based on the DSM-4, which I know is the old version. We haven't been trained on the DSM-5 yet at my agency. One of my colleagues is going to a training at some point in the next couple months, so we'll try and update this with the new DSM-5 diagnosis criteria. But you'll see that this is still based on the axis system, and I know that they've scrapped that in favor of a continuum or a level system. But from what I understand, some of the sites or some areas or programs or providers are still using the DSM-4 criteria until they get trained on the new version. So we're looking specifically for Axis 1 and Axis 2 diagnoses, or their equivalents in the new DSM-5. Those are the most relevant for criminal justice purposes. In some cases, there are mental health courts, veterans courts, where a specific diagnosis would be expected. I'm not sure that you guys will have that information in most cases. But we've got the actual diagnosis code over here, a quick explanation of what the diagnosis is, and then what axis. Date of diagnosis, so this could be, if you refer them to a mental health evaluation and they get a diagnosis while they're in the program, or say they've got one that's 10 years old that is attached to a case file from a previous treatment provider or something like that. Whatever the date is, you can enter here. You'll see if you select something from here, it'll populate these boxes over here just to give you at-a-glance information of what the diagnosis is, what type of, or what the grouping is, or the category of diagnosis is, and then down here what the axis is. So again, this is one of those where if the information's available, it's great to have. If it's not available, then you don't need to worry about it. So I believe the status updates is the next form that we'll go through. And this one's kind of the meat and potatoes of the database. This is how we track dynamic information, so information about a client that changes over time. So these are things that programmatically we as an agency or Adult Redeploy as a program is required by statute to keep track of and to keep track of changes in some of these statuses. The two main ones on this form are going to be oh, it's way at the front. Sorry, I'll have to reorganize this thing. So this, as I said, there are a couple pieces of information on here that are a bit more important because they're specifically mentioned in statute as being performance measures for the program. And those two are going to be education and employment. So the statute says we want to see if Adult Redeploy is changing education levels and if people are getting jobs while they're on the program. So all this other information here is tied to a specific date. So you'll see here we've got the client status date. This is the date that all of this other information is current as of. So their marital status, as of June 29, 2011, this person was single. As of that date, their veterans assistance status is not applicable. Probably they're not a veteran. Medicaid status, as of that date, they were enrolled in Medicaid. Employment status, as of that date, they were part-time. Had a GED, were living with family, and we're in the intake phase of their program. So when we get to this form from the main form, where this blank space is, there's a hidden button that's called initial status. So when you enter a client for the first time, you're just going through and putting in their information. You'll see that we've got that initial status button here, and the status updates is grayed out. So the initial status for an individual is what I call the baseline information. So at intake, when they come into Adult Redeploy, this is what their information is. So they were married, they were part-time employed, they had a GED, whatever the case is. From the main form, when you want to update these statuses or enter the statuses for a new client, you'll click on the initial status button. It'll take you to this form, which allows you to enter a date for that assessment or that status update, and then what the reason for this update is. So in this case, this is the initial one. This is the person's first status, so this is that baseline status as they come into the program. And you'll see that here that it defaults, the default date for this initial one is the date that they were enrolled in the program. So you'll say, okay, I'm going to make a new record, and it'll say, oh great, I'm going to close this form, don't freak out when it goes away, and you're here to a nice new blank form. You'll see that all these boxes are grayed out. Since we're kind of tracking this information periodically as a person goes through the program, some of this stuff isn't going to change all the time. Some of it may not change. We have the option here, so if things are going to change and you're going to be tracking changes on this page, or you want to enter this information, you'll say, okay, I'm going to update the statuses on this page, and the form will let you edit all of these things now. So their marital status, again, it's going to be as of February 7th, 2014. We'll say this guy is single, not applicable. Medicaid status. Given the ACT Court's goals and the population, the Medicaid status is one of those program-specific things that you guys are probably going to want to keep track of. And given Cook County's Medicaid enrollment process, these are the different options. I spoke with somebody over the phone with County Care and asked them to walk me through what the process would be. So this is my unofficial guide or for the Medicaid statuses. So the first one here is unknown. This is just kind of a placeholder. Not enrolled, no application. So that means, they haven't looked into County Care, they haven't submitted their application, nobody's even talked to them about it, they don't know what it is. They're in that initial, haven't even filled out the paperwork stage. The application submitted back to the client. So this is when the individual fills out the paperwork, submits it to the County Care system, and then the County Care system sends it back to them for double checking, and I'm not quite sure what other records checks, but this is the second step in the process after an application has been submitted. The next step, from my understanding, is that application then, once it's been verified, gets submitted to the state for their record process. After that, the application can be canceled if an individual doesn't follow up within the specified time frame. I think it's like 30 or 90 days, something like that. And the individual will have to resubmit their application. That may not happen all the time. I imagine you guys will be keeping on top of the application process. if the application gets approved by the state and the individual gets their paperwork back saying you're approved, wait for your card, your Medicare card or Medicaid card in the mail. We've got approved pending their card. Enrolled card received, so that means they're done with the process, they've got their county care card and they're good to go. If the application gets denied, my understanding is that the client or an individual can resubmit an application for reconsideration. So we've got application was denied, they're resubmitting, or they can be denied enrollment in county care because they're not eligible. So this is my stab at the process. If during the case management process you guys realize, wait, this is way off, let me know and we can update this list to make it more in line with how the process actually flows. So if anything looks off right now, write a note and we can talk about it after and get that sorted out. And then we have, again, because your program is going to be looking a large part at the Medicaid information, we have the date that this status was applicable. So this kind of allows you to follow up with them. So you know, if they say, okay, the application was resubmitted to the client for verification, and that was on, we'll say, so this is kind of a way when you're looking through the information to say, okay, that was 2 days ago, I'm going to follow up again with this guy in a week to see where he is in the process. Employment status, pretty straightforward. We do have it broken down if they're receiving unemployment benefits or if they're not receiving unemployment benefits. Most people, if they're unemployed, aren't, who are in the Redeploy program. And then not in workforce, that's if they're on disability or they're retired or some other reason. Highest education level, so this is the last grade completed, and we're not looking for specific grade numbers, it's just, you know, they completed some high school, so 9th grade through 11th grade, or some of 12th grade without graduating. High school graduate if they have their diploma, GED if it's a GED, and then any post-high school education. Housing status, this is where they're currently residing. So again, as of 2/7/2014, you know, let's say this guy's renting a place, and then zip code. So one thing that I've come to realize is that with a grants program like this, especially since it's state funded, legislators like to know who in their districts, which of their constituents are benefiting from the programs like this. So zip code is the best way that we can answer those requests. And it's also good to see the distribution, especially in Cook County where there are a number of zip codes and they loosely correspond to different neighborhoods. This is something that I generally don't highlight, but given the unique circumstances in Cook County, I will say if there is zip code of residence information, that's very useful information to have for Cook County. And then program phase, are you guys using a phase or a level system? So we've got you know, all the different levels up to level 4. If there is a level 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, let us know and we can add those options. If it's just going to be between 1 and 4, then you're good to go. You'll see with that initial, so the initial status, it defaults to the intake or initial phase. Lots of programs that use a phase system have like a 30-day enrollment phase. Some don't, they just dump you right into level 1 or phase 1. So you can go ahead and change that if you want. This is something we added specifically for you guys. As per request, we have next court date field. So again, this is as of February 7th, their next court date. Let's say it's February 14th, a nice solid week from now. This is something you can enter to keep track of. We're still working on some of those client summary reports. This will be one of the pieces of information that goes into that. And then we have this nice big open client status notes. This is for any type of narrative information that is desired to be kept track of. Since this will be used as a case management system as well, this kind of provides the option for whoever is entering the information to throw in some quick context or some notes or whatever a probation officer or a case manager would want to tie to this specific date. So again, these case notes would be as of 2/7/2014. It's a nice big box. I'm pretty sure it's the storage capacity is larger than anything you'd want to write in here. I don't recommend testing that out because I don't know if I want to read a lot, but it's there. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is how we keep track of things that change over time. So thinking back to those probation requirements or treatment conditions, this is where we keep track of that information, or how we measure a client's progress on things. So I'll go back to somebody here who has some information and give you a quick feel for what that's like. So this is somebody who's had some information entered. We're looking at his case information. So this is his initial status here. He was enrolled on 6/29. Here's his baseline information. So when he came in the program, he was part-time, had a GED, and was living with family. So if you say, okay, I want to keep track, or I want to update how he's doing in his requirements, or how he's doing in treatment, or whatever other condition he started, there's that button that says Update Requirement Statuses. So this will take you to this kind of pale green form, and it'll show you what's active, so which requirements are active as of the date of the status. So with this guy, this status is from 6/29. He had restitution active then, and then a substance abuse treatment requirement. You'll see it shows the provider down here, so Bridgeway here, and adult probation for restitution. This, in some cases, we've seen that an individual will be going to substance abuse treatment at multiple providers at the same time, or they'll be doing cognitive behavioral therapy at multiple providers. This is a way to distinguish between those two different requirements just by looking at the provider. And again, all this information is tied to that status date. And we're just looking for a couple quick pieces of information here. So as of this date, is the client meeting the requirements? So are they making payments towards their restitution in this case? If yes, then yes. If they're not, then no. And then what's the status of this requirement on this date? So in this case, since the guy hasn't finished paying off his restitution yet, we're going to say he's ongoing. So we're expecting more information in the future about his restitution payments. This is the end date, so if you say, okay, he successfully completed his restitution, he paid everything back, we would expect to see an end date up here, so the date that he finished paying. This, again, unfortunate placement of the boxes. So this is where the amount gets tracked. So you'll see on the requirement here, restitution, we said, okay, this guy's got to pay $24 in restitution while he's on probation. Here's how much he's paid to date. So as of 6/29, this guy's paid $13 in restitution. And I'll show you real quick when we go to the next status. So when we make a new status for this person, say a month later, it'll still show, it'll carry over the previous amount. So it'll say, okay, he still has the $13 paid. Say he paid $5 more the next time, you would change that 13 to 18. So it's kind of a running total of how much has been completed as of this date. So with this one here, this is an example of one of these requirements actually being completed. So this guy successfully completed his substance abuse treatment. The end date, so the date that he finished it, was 6/28. So you'll see that this date, 6/28, doesn't match up with this one up here, but it's close. With this is another one of those where we are trying to minimize the amount of extra work that goes into it. In an ideal world with unlimited staffing and unlimited time, I would love to see every time something happens, every time something changes, it gets added to this immediately. I know I don't live in a fantasy world like that, so you know, my recommendation for filling out these status updates is that it happen monthly. And generally, from what we've seen, some of these statuses don't change all that often, like employment, they could be unemployed for a while, or education, they may not even have a change while they're in the program. With treatment requirements, that's a bit more regular. So if we have a monthly update, so let's say this guy's next update would be at the end of July. When you want to say, okay, it's the end of the month, I want to update this guy's status, you would say add status update, and it'll take you back to this form and say, okay, here's the date that this status is active as of, and here's the type of update. So generally, it's going to be what's called a periodic status update. So that's just, you know, the regular updates or the regular tracking of these requirements or these other dynamic statuses. We have more detailed options for this. So if there is a rearrest or a technical violation or something like that, and you want to update some information because of one of those, that's how you would keep track of that type. And you'll see down here again with the numbers, this is how many assessments or statuses this individual has. So this is his second update, and it's about 2 weeks later. And you'll see that all this stuff is still grayed out. If nothing changes in 2 weeks or nothing changes in a month, you don't need to go through and re-enter everything again, because that's just a pain, and I don't want to have you guys have to do that. So that's where this update statuses box comes in. So if you say, you know what, none of this stuff changed on here, I'm not even going to bother with it, you can leave that box unchecked, and then when we're looking at the data, we'll know to, to figure out that this stuff didn't change, the previous status is still active. So, if you want to go back and say, okay, he's got these other things still going on. Okay, so as of this date, here's his restitution. He's still meeting requirements and making payments. It's still ongoing, and so now he's paid $15 towards that $24. That's, again, going from 6/29 to 7/12, or say February 7th to March 7th of 2014. This is how those ongoing requirements or those ongoing statuses are tracked. And again, these all of these records are individual records. So that's the reason. I'll just give a quick bit of background on why we have it set up this way rather than just a list of different records like we have on all the other forms. The way Access works is it automatically saves information once it's entered, and if something's overwritten, it'll delete that information from the database. We don't want that to happen, so we want to create a new record every time something changes because we don't want old information to be overwritten. So if we just had this form and didn't have any way for you guys to enter new information, the only type of information we would have is the most current. We wouldn't be able to know what happened before this. We wouldn't be able to see a client's progression as they go through the program. So with adult redeploy, as I mentioned, by legislation, we're required to see, or we're required to keep track of changes in employment and education and a number of other things. So if you think about it, if we were to just look at something like employment when they come into the program and then employment when they leave the program, that's 2 points in time. We'd be able to see if there's a change, but we'd miss everything that happened in the 18 months of their probation. So by having it set up this way, where each update is a discrete point in time, we can see what happens during that whole 18-month period. We can see if changes have occurred. We have a better selling point for the program. So in that example of just 2 time points, say John Smith comes in, he's unemployed, he's in the program for 18 months, and he gets a job his second month in the program, but he gets fired a month later. He gets another job after that, gets fired again, and then he goes through and he's unemployed at the end. If we're just looking at 2 points in time, we only see that he's unemployed at the start and he's unemployed at the end. We don't know that he actually got 2 jobs or 3 jobs or 4 jobs, or that he had a job 2 weeks after he started and then got fired a week before he finished. We wouldn't be able to keep track of that. And it looks not great for the programs, for the sites, because they're saying, hey, we did all this good stuff, we got this guy a number of jobs, he just couldn't keep them. By being able to track at different points in time and having those statuses attached to a specific date, we can now see that, okay, he was unemployed when he started, but a month later he had a job, 2 months later he didn't have a job, 3 months later he got another job. So I hope that helps to kind of visualize what we're trying to do with this form. This is one that I know from experience is it can be a little tricky because it's laid out a little bit differently from some of the other forms and the functionality is a little bit different. But I found that it helps if we explain how we're going to be using it and what we're using it for. It helps reinforce that a little bit.
After the initial file is created, is this the main form that we're
No. So this, when I was talking about it, on the green form, that's kind of the splash screen or the start screen. That's going to be the main form that you'll see all the time. That's like the initial record that identifies an individual. Most of the time, the information on every other form is going to stay the same, right? So they can't change their race or their gender. That's going to stay the same. They could change their name, but you're probably going to keep it as what it is. So those forms won't change. The other forms that we've gone through, like the non-compliance or the conditions and requirements, that stuff won't change, but new things can be added to it. So that's why we have all those different records on there. And those, as I mentioned, act as kind of a snapshot. This one is the only form where things are going to be changing from time to time. So this won't be the main form in terms of this is what shows up for a client when you enter or when you open and search for them in the database. But I guess as a client's progressing through the program, this will be kind of the main focus of the data entry or the information capture for a client who's going through the program. So literally, no, it's not the main form, but in theory and practice, this is probably where the bulk of information will be going in once a client's progressing through the program. So the last thing I'll go over here on this form is what we call wraparound services. It seems like every site has kind of a different name for these. We call them wraparound because they're not really conditions in the sense that the court's ordering them or that they're required to do them. But they are services that address needs that a client may have that may not be criminogenic, but if you address them, they can provide benefits. So it's similar functionality If you want to add some wraparound statuses or whatever you guys end up calling them, you would select that option, and then this button then becomes editable. So wraparound service statuses. And again, this is tied to the date of the status that you're entering. So, you've got this list of different types of services that can be referred. And again, this is based on the list that you sent. There are a number of things on here that aren't necessarily conditions or other requirements, but are offered as a part of the program and you want to keep track of. So again, with the Medicaid focus, we've got all the different medications or dental care, if they're being referred to that, or medical treatment. Some sites offer public aid enrollment assistance or transportation assistance in the form of a bus pass or a taxi service or something like that. Food assistance, housing assistance, lots of different types of wraparound services. And then as of this date, this is what's happening with that service. So, if we say, okay, as of 2/28/2014, we are going to refer this guy, we'll say for public aid enrollment assistance. So here are the different statuses that could be attached to that wraparound service on February 28th. So service provided through program, that means you guys, the ACT Court, is providing this. So with public aid enrollment assistance, unless you have somebody on staff who's actively doing that, that's probably going to be going through another provider. So service provided by other provider, that's in the case where the court or the program, say, has a contract or a memorandum of understanding with a public aid enrollment assistance agency. That would be other provider. And these two, so service provided, they're actually referred and they're actually going and getting whatever the service is at this point. Program thinks the service is needed, but the client doesn't. So if they say, you know what, we really want you to go sign up for disability insurance or SSI or something else, and the guy says, you know what, no, I don't want to do that. Or the program thinks the service is needed, but it's not available. So this is kind of a way to keep track of things that areas of need that clients may have, but there's nowhere yet to fill that need. So say you've got, okay, this guy needs to get signed up for, he needs help navigating the public aid system. You would like to refer him to that, but there's no agency that you guys have a contract with to do that, or whatever the case is. If the client is saying, hey, you know what, it's February 28th today, I really need help with this, can you guys help me out? Client request service. If the service is being rendered and the guy says, you know what, I don't need that assistance anymore, I got enrolled in public aid, I'm good to go, the service was completed and you would consider that a successful referral or intervention. Client ended service, unsuccessful, so if they dropped out halfway through or they stopped going to the agency that was helping them out, or if the agency says, you know what, we can't help this guy, he's being rowdy, we don't want to deal with him anymore, we told him to stop showing up. That's program ended service in that case. So like I mentioned, it's all tied to the date, and you'll see as you add new statuses periodically, these will carry over. So you'll be able to see, if we were to make a new assessment March 1st, 2014, we would see that, okay, he was enrolled in public aid enrollment assistance and whatever the status is, it's being provided through another provider. These will carry over, and again, since each status update is tied to a new date and a new record, we can see that whole progression of things without overwriting information. So the other two down here, child and children statuses, that's, again, not something that is really relevant, so I don't need to get into it. And I think that's it, if you can believe it. And we have some other buttons on here. Add new client record. So I actually just got a phone call last week from one of the new sites I had trained, and he said he's like, this may be a stupid question, but how do I make a new blank record? And I said, you know what, that's a great question, because we never had a button there before that did that. I just assumed everybody knew how to do it. Previously, there's this little arrow down here with a star on it that says new blank record. So, people click that and it opened up a new blank record. So instead of having to tell people that, we just decided to make a nice big button. So, say a new guy comes into court and is going to be enrolled or referred, and you want to add his information, click that button, it brings up a new blank shiny record. If you try and do it again while there's an open blank record, it won't like that, because you can't have multiple blank records at the same time. So it'll just tell you, hey, you need to enter some information here first before you try and move on. If you hit OK, it'll let you enter that information. If you try and navigate away from this, say by going back, it's going to say, hey, wait, there's a mandatory piece of information on here that you have to enter before you can go somewhere, and that's the acceptance code. So you need to tell the program whether this record is enrolled in the program or not enrolled. And if you say, oh, shoot, this is just a mistake, I don't want to enter anybody right now, you can hit OK. And try and go back. It won't let you. So you can try and close it out, and it'll say, hey, wait, I can't save this record right now because there's no information in it. How am I going to save? Nothing. So you just say, yeah, that's fine. It's blank anyway. It was a mistake. And I'm done. So if you ever get to this point where you have closed out the database and you want to get back into it, the runtime environment won't actually let you do that. So you'll have to close the whole thing and then open the file again. With this, there's the navigation pane over on this side, and you'll see it's kind of broken down into different sections. If you scroll all the way towards the bottom, there's one called Forms, and you'll see one called Main. So if you click that, it takes you back to the green form, and you're back with the last record that was created.